Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard, and I just want to give you a rundown of what happened on the opening Eternal weekend. We had the Saturday Scramble go down. It was about 45 players, so I don't want you drawing any major conclusions basing the entire thesis of the format around this, but I do want to highlight what did happen on the one tournament that I was aware of that we did have go down. We have a top 8 breakdown right here. As you can see, a lot of the expected decks did perform, especially when we look at the ladder stats for the opening weekend. Draven, Scion, Thresh, Nasus, and Ziggs Poppy have been some of the top contenders. Trundle Timeline's in there as well. Now, Set, Trundle, Feel the Rush didn't show up in the tournament setting at all, which I think makes sense. I don't think that deck is really built to last. I'm not sure that it is better than the more traditional Shadow Isle, Trundle, Tryndamere style of Feel the Rush, mostly because with Atrocity being back to fast speed, you have that kill button that is so pivotal. And I think that the Ionia version is just a little bit too combo-oriented, a little bit not suited for the wide-open tournament meta that we expect to have on the opening weekend. Now, maybe that will refine itself down by the time we get to the Runeterra Open. Only time will tell. I'm not super big on it, but I am willing to be proven wrong on that one. Here, though, it was just playing it safe, right? Thresh Nasus obviously gained a lot back. We dropped the Vaults of Helia. We go back to Thresh. We're playing a much more explosive early game with all of the cards that rotated out of that. Vile Feast is back, adds a lot back into the controlier aspects of this deck. And then Draven Scion I actually think was really interesting because when you look at the actual breakdown here, we had a Draven Scion Samira, a Draven Scion Vi, a full-on Draven Scion, and another Draven Scion Vi. So players are still experimenting with how aggressive they want to get with this. We're not really seeing Decimate come out. I think Blowback has really changed it so that we're not going to see Decimate coming out of these lists anytime soon. The ability to kill a unit and deal 3 to the Nexus for much less mana than the additional 1 damage you're going to get out of Decimate means that I think that straight up burn, full on mirror the pirate aggro style of Draven Scion is dead, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't that exciting. It wasn't the best aggro deck, but Draven Scion is that aggressive style of mid-range enough that you will still play it in aggro lineups like we see here, where Jada Cavi brought Ziggs, Poppy, Draven Scion, Vi, and Pirates. So Ziggs Poppy, one of those ladder decks that's been performing very well, as expected, right? It's an early weekend. It's very aggressive. This is what you expect to see dominating the ladder and putting players into the master tier this early on. But when we look at the top of the format, we'll notice something interesting, and it is that the 2 timelines players actually met in the finals. Now, I say Ornn timelines because Trundle is assumed, so we've got this Ornn Trundle timelines. We've seen players really experiment with what is the best secondary champion to go with the Trundle. Usually it ends up being a solo show like we see out of Bunch of Turtwigs who got second, and sometimes we'll see like Caitlyn. Ornn, maybe. I'm not convinced, but maybe. I mean, AJ the Pro came in with a little bit of a weirder build, I would say. You know, the Bone Club in the main, maybe a few more Weapon Masters than you would expect. But, I mean, Weapon Masters have always synergized very well with timelines, so maybe this is the version that we see going forward. But you'll notice, like, there are some big differences between the builds, right? Mostly that the Ornn version is very aggressive, plays Wild's Claw Ferocity, it's going for those big finishes, whereas a bunch of Turtwigs played the more traditional Buried in Ice, that Stairs combo that originally put timelines on the map. I'm not convinced that, well, I'm not going to say I'm not convinced that one is better than the other, because I do prefer the traditional version over the Ornn version, but I am also known to be a little slow to adapt to change when it comes to the meta and different builds for these kinds of decks. But I would say that, like, your traditional version of timelines is still going to serve you just fine. Now, as far as some of the other big champion names coming out of Eternal, I think Ezreal is one that a lot of players had their sights on coming back, and I need to remind everyone that, like, Ezreal wasn't really doing anything before he rotated. And Piltover and Zon got some cool cards, but I think the only way you are going to see Ezreal is paired with Seraphine, at least for the time being. Yang Zera came in with Karma Set, and I think that you can't play Karma Ezreal. I think Set stabilizes the mid game too well, and Karma really pushes through that late game finish in a way that Ezreal won't off of fewer cards. You know, Karma has that A plus B combo of Karma and place your bets, while Ezreal doesn't really have something like that. If you only have 2 cards in hand and it's Karma place your bets, you might just win that game. Ezreal doesn't have that, and I don't know that these decks are maintaining a high enough card advantage throughout the game in order to really facilitate an Ezreal game plan in the way that Ezreal, or Seraphine is rather, with the random card generation. So I think Ezreal Seraphine is cool. I'm not sure where we're going to land on final regional placement. Yang went for the Bandle City variant, which I think was probably one of, if not the most popular Seraphine Ezreal variants pre-rotation. Of course, Targon is something players are going to be looking at as well, because the 2 Targon cards that we got out of Glory and Navori actually synergize very well for this stally late game style of gameplay that Seraphine is known for, right? You've got your unicorn that heals you up. You've got your removal spell that targets as well. So, you know, maybe we'll see. There's just so many champions that fit into a Seraphine deck, right? Like Yang going for the Victor. Of course, Vi is back as well. If you go back to the Targon version, then you open yourself up to a Aphelios. Of course, the Targon versions were always more known for the Pursuit of Perfection rather than the Ezreal. But I'm willing to say that, like, Seraphine will probably have a tier 1 tournament deck as we get into the open. The champion combination and region combination, I think, is still yet to be decided, but it's definitely on the radar and definitely up there, even if the latter performance is going to be very scattered because players are playing different region and champion combinations. It's going to be hard to get ladder data on Seraphine, unless there is one unanimous version that everybody agrees on, but I don't really see that happening in the next week or two, unless everyone just kind of shuts their brains off and net decks whatever the highest Seraphine deck on Runeterra ARs, which is totally possible. But outside of that, Iceborne Spiders, I didn't really expect to come back. Going down to 5 mana from 6 was apparently enough to shove this one back into the meta, getting a 2nd place finish, as well as Kevor taking it to a top 4 finish. The lists, as you can see, very, very similar. I'm eyeballing like a 1 of Withering Whale difference, and I actually can't... Okay, it's one Wraith of Echoes versus 1 Withering Whale. And the Wraith of Echoes actually... you know, kind of a cool addition to the Iceborne Spiders archetype, and this is a card that I think a lot of players have been very excited to try and find a spot for ever since it came out, and apparently you've got one now. Now, as far as how good is Iceborne Spiders going to be going forward, it tends to do pretty well in the metas where it's viable, so I'm not expecting this one to fall off. I don't know that it's going to be like a top 5 deck. I think your top 5 decks for the Runeterra Open, if it were to happen like this weekend, would be Scion, Thresh-Nasus, Timelines, Ziggs Poppy, and I'm not sure what I would think for the 5th deck, but I think like these are definitely your safe opening picks. Bandle City Conservatory, another one that like I would put like just outside of the top 5, the old traditional Katarina Annie, Tibulk WinCon. A lot of people were freaking out about Condense and how it's going to interact with all these different things, and it turns out Tibulk is a pretty good holder for the Condense, for lack of a better phrasing at this moment. Lord Broadmane also, like, you just have really good hits for your Condense, and of course you can also pick an opposing follower, so just something to keep in mind. But that is what we got out of our opening weekend. Aggro showed up, didn't do super hot. Thresh-Nasus, Timelines mirror in the finals, I think, is one of the biggest highlights of this, as well as this like Nora Fizunami that I didn't even bother clicking on. But you know, you can dig into this a little bit. A link to this spreadsheet will be in the description below. So you can check this out, click around on the decks, try to figure it out. And I'm going to be actually taking AG the Pro's lineup into probably the gauntlet tonight and kind of seeing what it's all about, seeing how cohesive it is and how I feel about the meta. But thank you so much for watching. I've been Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.